I would like to go ahead and get started by first saying at the 228 Accelerator, we stand in solidarity with all oppressed people and freedom struggles around the world. And I think it's so important that we say that, especially at this time. And I also want to get started with a collective global breath. So sit as you're able with your feet firmly planted on the ground. Imagine that the balls of your feet are extending from your body, deeply rooted in the earth, connected to the other people on this Zoom call and the communities in which you serve. Relax your shoulders, swallow a couple of times, and close your eyes. Going to breathe in by our nose and out of our mouths, always using our throats for this breathing exercise. Breathe in as long as possible. Breathe in as slowly as possible, and breathe in as deeply as possible. Around the world with one collective breath, let's breathe together. Inhale, breathing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Hold it. And exhale, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Release. Inhale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, full expansive lungs, and exhale, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, release. The deepest breath of the day, we're taking it together. Inhale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, hold it. And exhale, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, release. Open up your eyes, come back to center. I'll tell you a little bit about why we do that. I always like to open up any of my conversations and talks with a collective breath, because sometimes we need to be reminded that the first change that must happen is the change with the self. And when our bodies inhale and exhale, we are reminded that our actual chest cavities expand and contract, reminding us that we're dynamic beings and can change. Also, the human body rarely comes up with great ideas when it's under stress. So we always have our breath to go to remind us, to bring us back to homeostasis, calm our bodies down so we are recentered for creative thought. And our world needs not just loving thought right now, our world needs dynamic, creative thought. Before we get started, I just want to direct your attention to the bottom of your toolbar. If you do need closed captioning, go ahead and turn it on. It should be at the bottom with the little C. Just want to make sure that this talk is accessible to any and everyone on the call. I'm a storyteller. I've decided to take on that identity. As people say, I often tell stories. I'm going to tell you a story about my own tradition, and hopefully something in that story resonates with you. So in my tradition, the holiday season pours lush, fecund evergreen poinsettias and holly red into the room. Often sprinkled with winks and blinks, or often submerged into the abyss of green, the white lights peek and glance between the green needles. The chorus of purple wrapped tinsel railings muted brown wooden banisters as they were faded by off-white decor. The permanence of the blue sky was challenged only by the black of night, whose presence set the stage for illumination. But this season was special in the way it painted and poured different colors into the polychromatic canvas. The colors were there, but not in the order of tradition. Splashed, splattered, dripped between November and December, they were in different places, occupying nooks and cracks where color took no form that I could easily recognize. And to be honest, it was unsettling. The unexpected homegoing of an elder this November brought me back home for a weekend. In the past, these homegoing ceremonies were experienced from the wooden pew. My sisters and I were asked this time to serve as the flower bearers. In romanticized white, we carried the sprays of flower to the body and then out of the sanctuary to join our other family members at rest. In December, with white in the background, another shade of purple was added to my cinematic palette. The latest version of the color purple had summoned the blood memories of my father and my mother's people to the fore. Panels of their silhouette recollections, both known and unknown, were now embraced in the timbre of my father's voice. In the blood of memory is the embodiment of what it feels like to be disrespected, humiliated, and shamed. In the blood of memory are the triumphs and the traumas, the poverty and abundance, the solitude and community. In the bodies of those who were pulled from lunch counters, accused of fraud, plagiarism, or theft, held at gunpoint by vigilantes, victims of moving borders, displaced migrants, those humiliated in classrooms or condemned to ugly with deeply brown skin. These memories maroon the life force, arresting the breath and darkening and deepening it from holly red to carmine burgundy. Over the holiday season, I read The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison as an adult during the last week in December. In America, it's a banned book, sentenced to being too close by the women elders in my family. It's the story of race and identity, whiteness, anti-Blackness, and beauty. The main character, Picola's overwhelming need to be seen, heard, and loved by society drove her to a panic and frantic psychosis because of self-hatred because she was not white. I've been on this earth long enough to know that white supremacy has its haunts. It also has its haints. That's the way my grandfather would name an unwelcomed, restless spirit. The too closeness of this haint kept the spine of this book in my own house unbroken, without crooks and creases. And while the grip of this haint is loosening a bit, was still strong enough to control the constricted flow, creating dark patches of purple on my mother's skin. This too is my blood memory. Blood memory, I'll say that again. Blood memory is the sound that choreographer Alvin Ailey uttered to describe the creative force of his work. With the stage as his canvas, the divination of Black bodies fan and stretch and bow and lunge and leap, conjuring the spirits of ancestors through their actual bodies. As mediums, they held a portal between the past and the present, connecting us through and to a time beyond the present moment. We all have blood memories. They source our creativity and intelligence when we learn to read them. They anchor our identity and create our lens for seeing and understanding the world. And culturally, we create traditions to hold on to our memories and connect our people and our past. You know, this is core to what it means to be human. It's also core to the human experience. But our tradition and our allegiance to the past must not be the only practice of cultural preservation. Social and technological progress should create more and more space to, as my ancestors would sing, being buked and scorned, should create more and more space between us and the trouble all over this world. And while powerful forces are working to bleach the blood, the messiness of the blood memory can still connect us to our ancestors, our indigenous knowledge, our common land, and each other. Breathing life into this memory need not be to imitate or reproduce the past or engage in social mimicry. We breathe life into the blood memory to connect the past to the present. When we can breathe life into the blood memory, it can become a creative force that expands our collective cognition, humanizes our intelligence, and reorients our relationships with ourselves, each other, and the shared land. We can preserve our culture by designing a new one. So I have some questions for us to think about and ponder. What will it take to breathe life into our collective blood memory? How can schools emerge and become the lungs that breathe this new life into the memory, transforming the color from maroon to poinsettia holly red? How can schools help us come more alive to what it means to be human and connect to ourselves and our gifted wisdom of and with our ancestors? Well, first, we have to hold some of the contradictions of the way schools are currently designed. Schools are proposed to reproduce culture and society and transform it simultaneously. But wisdom guides us to the appropriate waiting for our time. A culture that has broken our relationship with each other, our land, and ourselves has been able to recklessly scale to our detriment. Our economic systems discourage cross-racial solidarity in the name of tradition and nationalism. They encourage exploitation of the earth, animals, and resources for personal comfort, further disconnecting ourselves from each other and our own blood memories. Now, the relationships required for optimal well-being include healthy relationships with the land. They include healthy relationships with the natural world. They include time to create a healthy relationship with the self and others. That said, any campaign for racial justice without environmental justice is not incorrect, y'all. It's just insufficient. Climate change activism without racial justice risks perpetuating white supremacy in its ignorance and isolation. Racial justice and environmental justice are not two distinct campaigns. They are one and the same. If we buy into the narrative that some white people fight for the earth and the Black and brown people fight for justice, then we've missed the point. We've missed the point. And then the color of the seasons fade into loneliness. I'll say that again. We buy into the narrative that white people fight for the earth and Black and brown people fight for humanity. We miss the point. And the colors of the season fade into loneliness. It is through this acknowledging and honoring our shared connection to the earth that we can become grounded in a new, more holistic, welcoming humanity. This cosmic separation does not have to be our fate. Doesn't have to be this way. With shared awareness and frameworks, we can make a different decision and change direction. And this is where I see the hope for schools and classrooms. Our classrooms can become the spaces where we don't break all the traditions, but just the ones that prevent our collective growth. This is the work of intelligence, the new intelligence at work. Our lessons in our schools can create the spaces to evaluate the impact of our small personal moves, like what's at the end of our forks. Learning standards could be redesigned to assess conditions for optimal well-being for those who live at the bleeding edge and evaluate the impact of our traditions. We stop doing things that hurt people. Assessment of skill and technique could be integrated and would be integrated into individual gifts and passions and directed to relevant curricular challenges of the moment. Bodies in the building would learn the necessary skills to connect their ancestral and indigenous blood memory and transform the trauma and triumph into right on time intelligence, the humanized cognition needed to rise gracefully and radically to the challenges of our time. Our classrooms can be designed to breathe the space between the memories of the past and the opportunities of the present. But we need the collective will and intent to move differently together before action. This is what it means to speak and design the future with a key awareness of the memories and histories that came before us and that can fuel our creativity. We recognize now more than ever before, language and discourse have an insidious power and influence and ability to control how we think, our beliefs, our actions, and our culture. Everyone on this call, if we are trying to write a different story, we must use different language and we must do the hard work of replacing our current hegemonic discourse. This insidious power is so great that it's made the walls of our schools and classrooms incredibly rigid, so rigid that they might not be able to hold the expansive volume of this new collective radical breath without cracking. So what are we left to do? Well, this is where we say we just learn to breathe elsewhere. We learn to breathe elsewhere, and we learn to breathe elsewhere together. This new breath is the hope and the dream of the blood memory, the creative force to fuel new ways of being and thinking that center wholeness and optimal well-being for everyone in the world, regardless of your place and status. This new breath requires us to assess the fitness of our current systems, and where they are unfit, we move elsewhere. This does not have to be loud, disrespectful, violent, dramatic, or even public. It simply requires us to reset our expectations to preserve our own well-being quietly. And from there, we start building and designing anew. And in that building and designing anew, this is what a new future would require and look to us to do. Designing a new future requires us to no longer wait for the most powerful to change, even though we know that their change is required and this change is important. But the moment we start to design a new future, it means that we are the ones that show them the way to change. But to do this, we must first change ourselves. With this in mind, we start to study different things with a different purpose. We study nutrition and science not just to get a good job, but to learn how to nourish ourselves and loved ones without hurting others. In turn, our proficiency in math and science is not just to secure a firm place in the professional class, but to design new ways of living sustainably and sufficiently without wasting natural resources, transforming our relationships with ourselves and with the land. We must learn the meditative arts as a way to remind ourselves that there are more than 5 senses, y'all. And there are other ways of knowing in the body that can help us experience and take in the new knowledge that can help us design new solutions and give us new ways of perceiving the beauty and the wisdom that already exists in the natural environment that can enhance our collective literacy, sense-making, and relationships. We'll learn multiple languages to share our knowledge and invite others to be a part of the conversation, speaking words of inspiration that encourage others to design with us, to design this future with us. And in this way, the new learning spaces we design, we do it together. And this means that we have a completely different perspective on everything. We self-custody our learning credentials so we can redistribute power through learning systems and design new ways to heal ourselves that privilege relationships, ancestral wisdom, indigenous knowledge, and everything that's needed to recreate the new world. We exchange goods and services and economies of grace. I'll say that again. We exchange goods and services and economies of grace and be in better relationships with ourselves and each other. We actually put ourselves in the position where we create the new knowledge and the new economies, and then we can return for the others and welcome them when they're ready. We get started anyway. The new future does not start over there, y'all. It starts right here with the people on this call. We have to imagine and design a new culture together. We do not and cannot wait for someone else to build the future we want. We are the designers, the teachers, the learners, the students, the young, the old. All of us are the designers. And this at its core is what equity by design is all about. This is what it means to dance differently in living color. Now, my grandmother, it's already passed on. She's already an ancestor. My grandmother was famous when I was growing up, had a saying, and she would say, "Time and tide waits for no man." Since her birth in 1915, the sea levels have risen, and the tide is both impatient and intrusive, moving more inland yearly. The earth is warming, and there seems to be less and less mental space to think and move differently. The water of my ancestors' wade is now threatened by flash floods. One of the sayings that my grandmother had, these words are a part of my blood memory. And each day reveals a new dimension, a new level of meaning. And as time passes, and as we get more meaning, the colors of the season should change. Not so much that we no longer recognize them, or that they become disconnected from our memory, or so unfamiliar that they become obscure, but just enough for us to collectively recognize that change is not only coming, but change has already arrived. Perhaps the colors are not required to stay within the lines of the past, but are unleashed and able to assume the form needed for the present moment. They can then drip and splash and lunge and fan and fall helplessly into the deepest blue canvas without fear. Then the colors and the hues of the new democracy will emerge. The colors and the hues of the new democracy will emerge. They're black, brown, white, green, and blue, all balanced, nourished, and full of life. And maybe then we can all take a collective breath, exhale, and notice the beauty of the color purple together. Thank y'all so much.